You keep telling yourself you're waiting for the right moment. That's a lie. There is no right moment. There's only the moment where things feel uncomfortable and you run. That's your pattern. That's your entire identity right now. Avoid pain, avoid pressure, avoid growth. And then you sit there confused about why your life looks exactly the same year after year. You're not stuck because life is hard. You're stuck because you're soft. Let me break something most people don't have the backbone to understand. The moment discomfort shows up, that's not resistance, it's a signal. It's the gateway. But you've trained yourself to interpret discomfort as danger instead of opportunity. So every time life tries to upgrade you, you retreat back into your safe little routine. Same habits, same mindset, same weak results. And then you wonder why nothing changes. Of course nothing changes. You keep choosing comfort over power. Now here's where it gets interesting. People talk about speaking in tongues like it's some mystical nonsense. It's not. Strip away the fairy tales, and what you're looking at is a state of absolute mental override. It's when a man stops thinking in his normal, limited language, a language of excuses, fear, and hesitation, and starts operating from something deeper. Raw instinct. Pure conviction. No hesitation, no doubt. It's a shift where your identity stops negotiating and starts commanding. Most men never reach that state because they never push themselves far enough. They tap out the second things get uncomfortable. But when you stay in the fire, when you force yourself through repetition, discipline, and pressure, you start to break your old patterns. Your mind stops speaking the language of weakness. It starts speaking in something else. Call it tongues. Call it instinct. Call it instinct. Call it dominance. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you're no longer the same person. That's the real transformation nobody explains. It's not about motivation. It's about identity collapse. The weak version of you has to die. Not slowly, not comfortably, violently. You don't negotiate with weakness. You suffocate it. Every time you choose discomfort when you train harder, work longer, push further than you want, you're rewriting your internal language. You're building a version of yourself that doesn't even recognize quitting as an option. And here's the brutal truth. You're addicted to comfort. That's your real problem. Not lack of opportunity, not bad luck. Comfort. You wake up and structure your entire day around avoiding pressure. Easy decisions, easy actions, easy life. And then you expect extraordinary results. That's delusion. You don't get power by doing what's easy. You get power by doing what others refuse to do repeatedly until it becomes your default state. Discomfort is not your enemy. It's your proving ground. It's where weak men fold and strong men are built. Every second you avoid it, you're reinforcing a losing identity. Every second you face it, you're stepping into control. There is no middle ground. You either train yourself to dominate your impulses or you become a slave to them. Comfort is not harmless. It feels safe, familiar, even deserved. But that's exactly why it's dangerous. It seduces you into thinking you're progressing when in reality you're just maintaining a low standard. You wake up, follow the same routine, avoid anything that stretches you, and convince yourself that consistency equals growth. It doesn't. Repeating what's easy only reinforces who you already are, and if your results are average, that repetition is locking you into that level permanently. Look at your decisions closely. The food you choose, the work you avoid, the conversations you delay, the risks you never take. None of it is random. It's all driven by one principle: minimizing discomfort. You don't push harder in the gym because it burns. You don't pursue bigger opportunities because rejection feels heavy. You don't discipline your time because structure feels restrictive. So you default to what's comfortable again and again until it becomes your identity. Not someone who can't succeed, someone who won't do what it takes. Comfort doesn't announce itself as a threat. It disguises itself as balance, self-care, or even intelligence. You tell yourself you're being realistic when you lower your goals. You call it avoiding stress when you step back from challenges. But what you're really doing is protecting your current level from being disrupted. And that's the trap. Because the version of you that built your current life is not capable of building a better one without change. Growth requires friction. Without it, nothing evolves. The real problem is that comfort compounds. One easy decision leads to another. Skip the hard task today, delay the difficult conversation tomorrow, avoid the uncomfortable risk next week, and suddenly months pass with no meaningful progress. You don't feel the damage immediately, which makes it even more dangerous. It's slow, silent decline. Your standards drop, your discipline weakens, and your confidence erodes, not because you failed, but because you never truly tested yourself. There's also a psychological cost most people ignore. Every time you choose comfort over challenge, you send a message to yourself. I'm not capable of more. You may not say it out loud, but your actions reinforce it. Over time, that belief becomes embedded. You hesitate more, you doubt yourself faster, you settle quicker. And then you start blaming external factors, circumstances, timing, other people, when the real issue is internal. You've trained your mind to avoid pressure instead of mastering it. High performers operate differently. They don't wait for comfort to disappear. They move despite it. They understand that discomfort is not something to eliminate, but something to control. It becomes a tool. When something feels difficult, they lean into it instead of stepping back. They recognize that resistance is a signal that they're approaching a new level, not a reason to retreat. That shift in interpretation changes everything. The same situation that stops most people becomes fuel for those who are disciplined. If you're honest, you already know where comfort is holding you back. It's in the habits you avoid fixing, the effort you don't give, the standards you quietly lowered. And until you confront that directly, nothing changes. Not your results, not your mindset, not your position in life. Comfort will keep you exactly where you are. Predictable, controlled, and limited while you convince yourself you're doing enough. Discomfort is the moment most people misread completely. The second something feels difficult, uncertain, or mentally heavy, they interpret it as a signal to stop. That instinct feels natural, but it's also the exact mechanism that keeps them trapped at the same level. What feels like resistance is often the edge of growth. It's the point where your current capabilities are no longer enough, and instead of stepping forward, you step back, protecting your limitations. Think about how this plays out in real situations. The moment a task requires more focus than you're used to, you look for distractions. When a conversation becomes confrontational, you soften your position or avoid it entirely. When an opportunity demands risk, you hesitate until it passes. None of these decisions feel dramatic in the moment, but they all have the same outcome. You stay exactly where you are. Discomfort was the doorway to expansion, and you chose to walk away from it. The problem isn't discomfort itself. The problem is your relationship with it. You've been conditioned to associate it with danger or failure, so your first reaction is to escape. But discomfort is not a threat, it's feedback. It's telling you that you're operating beyond your usual boundaries. That's where adaptation happens. That's where new skills are built, where confidence is earned, where identity begins to shift. Without that pressure, there is no reason for your mind or body to evolve. There's a pattern you can't ignore. Everything that improves your life sits on the other side of discomfort. Physical strength requires strain. Financial growth requires risk. Leadership requires confrontation. Discipline requires sacrifice. None of these are comfortable processes, and they're not supposed to be. The discomfort is part of the transformation. It forces you to develop resilience, to sharpen your focus, to operate with intent instead of convenience. Avoiding discomfort doesn't keep you safe, it keeps you stagnant. It limits your exposure to anything that could challenge your current level, which means your abilities never expand. Over time, this creates a gap between what you could become and what you actually are. That gap isn't caused by lack of talent or opportunity. It's caused by repeated decisions to stay within what feels manageable instead of stepping into what demands growth. There's also a shift that happens when you start facing discomfort consistently. It stops feeling like something you have to endure and starts becoming something you expect. The initial resistance fades, replaced by a sense of control. You begin to trust yourself more, not because things get easier, but because you've proven you can handle difficulty. That confidence is different from motivation. It's built on evidence. You've done the hard things before, so you know you can do them again. Most people never reach that point because they never stay in discomfort long enough. They touch it briefly, feel the pressure, and retreat. But growth doesn't happen in moments. It happens through sustained exposure. You have to remain in that space, work through the resistance, and allow the process to reshape you. That's where the real change occurs, not in starting, but in continuing when it would be easier to stop. If you want to move forward, your decision-making has to change. Instead of asking what feels comfortable, you start asking what creates progress. Instead of avoiding pressure, you step toward it deliberately. Discomfort becomes a filter. If something challenges you, demands more from you, or forces you to stretch beyond your current limits, that's exactly where your attention needs to go. Your mind is not designed to make you powerful. It's designed to keep you safe, efficient, and comfortable. That's a problem if your goal is dominance, growth, and control. Because the same system that protects you from danger also protects you from progress. It avoids risk, minimizes effort, and seeks the easiest path available. Left unchecked, it will guide you toward a life that feels stable but delivers nothing exceptional. You feel this every day, whether you admit it or not. The hesitation before starting something difficult. The urge to delay when a task demands focus. The internal negotiation that tells you to do it later or take it easy. That's not weakness in a dramatic sense, it's default programming. Your brain is conserving energy and avoiding stress, exactly as it was built to do. But in a modern environment where success depends on pushing limits, that instinct becomes a liability. Most people never override this system. They listen to it, obey it, and then wonder why they don't achieve anything beyond average. They wait for motivation to appear, as if the feeling will somehow align perfectly with the actions required. It doesn't. Motivation is inconsistent, unreliable, and often absent when you need it most. If your actions depend on how you feel, your results will always be unstable. Control starts when you separate action from emotion. You stop asking whether you feel ready, energized, or confident, and you execute regardless. That shift is not natural, it has to be built. Through repetition, through structure, through deliberate exposure to situations your mind would rather avoid. Each time you act against your initial resistance, you weaken the influence of that default programming and strengthen your ability to operate on command. Discipline is not about intensity, it's about consistency under resistance. Anyone can perform when conditions are easy. Very few can maintain standards when everything in them is pushing to stop. That's the difference between average and elite. One follows internal comfort signals, the other overrides them. Over time, that difference compounds into completely different outcomes. There's a mechanical aspect to this that most people ignore. Your behaviors create patterns, and those patterns shape your identity. If you repeatedly give in to hesitation, delay, and avoidance, you become someone who hesitates, delays, and avoids. It's not abstract, it's reinforced through action. On the other hand, if you repeatedly execute despite discomfort, you become someone who acts decisively. Identity is not something you declare, it's something you demonstrate consistently. This is where pressure becomes valuable. When you deliberately place yourself in environments that demand higher standards, tighter deadlines, greater responsibility, you force your system to adapt. At first, there's resistance. Your mind looks for ways out, distractions, excuses. But if you hold the line and continue executing, something shifts. The resistance doesn't disappear, but it loses control. You begin to operate with a different baseline, one where action is expected, not negotiated. Most people never experience that shift because they never apply enough pressure for long enough. They start strong, then fall back into old patterns the moment it becomes uncomfortable. That inconsistency resets their progress every time. What they're missing is that transformation requires sustained effort beyond the point of initial resistance. It's not about starting, it's about continuing when your internal system is pushing you to stop. If you want a different level of results, you need a different level of control. That means building systems that remove choice from the equation. Fixed routines, non-negotiable standards, clear expectations. You don't rely on how you feel in the moment. You follow the structure you've set. Over time, that structure rewires your default responses. What once felt difficult becomes automatic, and what once required effort becomes your baseline. At that point, you're no longer reacting to your environment or your emotions. You're directing your actions with intent, and that's where real leverage begins. When your output is determined by decision, not by mood. Most people live trapped inside a narrow mental loop, repeating the same thoughts, the same doubts, the same internal dialogue that keeps them predictable and limited. Every decision is filtered through hesitation. Every action is negotiated with fear. You call it thinking, but in reality, it's a constant cycle of self-interference. You hesitate, you overanalyze, you delay, and then you wonder why nothing decisive ever comes out of you. What you've been told to trust, your thoughts, your feelings, your internal voice, is often the very thing holding you back. That voice is conditioned by past experiences, by failures you haven't processed, by limits you've accepted without question. It speaks in caution and doubt, in hesitation. And the more you listen to it, the more authority it gains over your actions. You don't act with certainty, you act with permission, waiting for your mind to agree before you move. There's a different state available, but it requires breaking that loop completely. When people refer to speaking in tongues in a high-performance sense, they're describing a mental override, a point where you're no longer operating within your usual internal dialogue. You're not asking yourself whether you should act. You're not analyzing every outcome. You're executing. Clean, direct, without interference. It's not emotional. It's not chaotic. It's controlled intensity. The state doesn't come from motivation or inspiration. It comes from pressure and repetition. When you push yourself into environments where hesitation costs you, where delays have consequences, where action is required, you start to bypass your normal thinking patterns. At first, it feels uncomfortable, even unnatural. Your mind tries to pull you back into its familiar rhythm of doubt and analysis. But if you keep moving forward, something shifts. The noise reduces. The decision-making compresses. Action becomes immediate. That's where most people fail. They experience the edge of that state, feel the intensity, and retreat because it's unfamiliar. They go back to thinking instead of doing. But the ones who stay in it, who continue operating under pressure, begin to rewire their responses. The gap between thought and action closes. They don't need to convince themselves anymore. They don't need to build up confidence before they move. The action itself becomes the source of confidence. There's a level of clarity that comes with this. Not the kind that comes from sitting and reflecting, but the kind that comes from execution. When you're no longer stuck in your head, you see things as they are. Decisions become simpler. You either act or you don't. There's no endless internal debate. That simplicity is powerful because it removes friction. It allows you to operate at a speed and precision that most people can't match. This is also where identity begins to shift in a real way. You stop seeing yourself as someone who needs time, motivation, or perfect conditions. You become someone who acts on command. That identity is built through repeated exposure to the state. The more you operate without hesitation, the more natural it becomes. What once felt intense becomes normal. What once required effort becomes automatic. The mistake most people make is waiting to feel ready before they act. But readiness is a byproduct of action, not a prerequisite. When you step into this state, when you override hesitation and execute, you create momentum. That momentum carries you forward, making the next action easier, then the next, until you're operating at a level that would have felt impossible before. If you want to reach that level, you have to stop relying on your current way of thinking. It's not designed for what you're trying to achieve. You have to push past it, consistently, until a new pattern takes over, one where action is immediate, controlled, and decisive. Most people try to manage their weaknesses instead of eliminating them. They negotiate with bad habits, justify inconsistent behavior, and build entire routines around avoiding their own limitations. That approach feels reasonable, but it guarantees one outcome: you stay exactly as you are. You don't rise above weakness by accommodating it. You reinforce it. Every compromise becomes a signal that your standards are flexible, and once your standards are flexible, your identity becomes unstable. The version of you that avoids pressure, delays action, and chooses comfort is not something you can refine into strength. It has to be replaced. That's where most people hesitate, because replacement requires confrontation. It forces you to look directly at your patterns without excuses. The missed opportunities, the lack of discipline, the inconsistent effort, it all points to one thing. You've been tolerating behaviors that directly contradict the results you claim to want. There's a fundamental shift that has to occur. You stop treating your limits as part of your personality and start treating them as flaws that need to be removed. That distinction matters. If you see your weaknesses as just who you are, you'll protect them. If you see them as obstacles, you'll attack them. That mindset changes how you respond in critical moments. When resistance shows up, you don't step back. You lean in because you recognize that's exactly where the problem is. This is not about intensity for a few days or weeks. Short bursts of effort don't change identity. What changes identity is sustained, deliberate action that contradicts your old patterns. If you've been someone who avoids difficult tasks, you deliberately choose the hardest option available and follow through. If you've been inconsistent, you build systems that force consistency regardless of how you feel. Every action becomes a direct challenge to the version of you you're trying to eliminate. There's friction in that process, and it's unavoidable. Your mind will resist. It will look for ways to justify stopping, to delay, to return to familiar behavior. That resistance is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's confirmation that you're targeting the right problem. The mistake is interpreting that resistance as a reason to back off. In reality, it's the exact point where progress is happening. If you push through it consistently, the intensity decreases. Not because the task gets easier, but because your capacity increases. Another factor most people overlook is environment. If you remain in the same conditions that supported your weak habits, you make the process harder than it needs to be. Your surroundings either reinforce your standards or undermine them. If everything around you is aligned with comfort and minimal effort, you're constantly fighting against it. Changing your environment, your routines, your expectations, even the people you interact with creates pressure that supports the new identity you're building. There's also a level of accountability required that most people avoid. It's easy to say you want change, but much harder to hold yourself to a standard where failure is not ignored or rationalized. You need clear metrics, clear expectations, and a willingness to confront when you fall short. Without that, you drift back into old patterns because there's no consequence attached to inconsistency. Over time, if you maintain this level of pressure, something shifts. The behaviors that once required effort become your default. The hesitation that used to define your decisions starts to disappear. You don't need to force discipline in the same way because it's no longer external. It's part of how you operate. That's when the identity change becomes real, not because you declared it, but because your actions consistently reflect it. Weakness doesn't disappear on its own. It gets replaced when you stop tolerating it and start acting in direct opposition to it every single time it shows up. You keep using the word stuck as if it's something external, something imposed on you by circumstances, timing, or other people. It isn't. What you're calling being stuck is a pattern of decisions, repeated, predictable, and entirely within your control. Every day you're presented with options that either move you forward or keep you where you are. And more often than not, you choose the option that feels easier in the moment. That's not being stuck. That's selecting comfort over progress consistently. Look at how your day is structured. Not what you intend to do, but what you actually do. The tasks you delay, the effort you hold back, the standards you quietly lower when no one is watching. Those are not accidents. They are choices. You may not announce them, but they define your trajectory more than any long-term goal you've set. Goals don't create results, decisions do. And if your daily decisions are aligned with comfort, your long-term outcomes will reflect that, no matter how ambitious your plans sound. There's a gap between what you say you want and what your actions prove you're willing to do. That gap is where your frustration comes from. You want growth, but you avoid the discomfort that produces it. You want better results, but you hesitate when higher effort is required. You want change, but you protect the habits that keep you the same. That contradiction creates the illusion of being stuck, when in reality, you're maintaining the exact conditions that prevent progress. The difficult part is accepting responsibility at a level most people avoid. It's easy to point to external factors, limited opportunities, lack of support, imperfect conditions. Those things exist, but they're not the deciding factor. There are always actions available to you that would improve your position, even if they're small. The reason they're not taken is not because they're impossible, but because they're uncomfortable. That's the real barrier, and until you address it directly, nothing changes. There's also a tendency to overvalue intention and undervalue execution. You plan, you think, you consider different approaches, but when it comes time to act, the intensity drops. You choose a version of the task that feels manageable instead of one that creates real progress. That pattern repeats, and over time, it produces minimal results. Then you interpret those minimal results as evidence that you're stuck when they're actually the outcome of diluted effort. Changing this requires a shift in how you evaluate your decisions. Instead of asking what feels reasonable or sustainable, you start asking what produces the highest level of progress. That question forces you to confront options you would normally avoid. It removes the comfort filter and replaces it with the performance filter. The answer will often involve more effort, more risk, or more pressure than you're used to. That's exactly why it works. There's a direct relationship between the level of discomfort you're willing to tolerate and the level of control you have over your life. If your tolerance is low, your options are limited. You'll only pursue paths that feel safe, which are usually crowded, slow, and average. If your tolerance is high, your options expand. You can take on challenges others avoid, move faster, and operate with less competition. That's where leverage comes from. You don't need a completely different life to change your trajectory. You need different decisions, repeated consistently. The moment you start choosing the harder option, the one that demands more focus, more discipline, more effort, you begin to shift direction. Not instantly, but predictably. And as those decisions compound, the idea of being stuck becomes irrelevant because your actions are actively creating movement. So stop pretending you're stuck. You're not stuck. You're choosing the easier path every single time. And that choice is costing you everything. Your potential, your respect, your future. All of it. You want control? Then walk straight into discomfort and stay there until it becomes your home. You want power? Then kill the version of you that keeps running. Because at the end of the day, there are only two types of men, the ones who face the fire and the ones who get burned by life anyway. Decide which one you are, and don't lie to yourself this time.